Paris today if they had won it, but who knows? I'm sure we'll find out. But, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Good recovery.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
That's one of the many eyewitnesses and thankfully one of the many survivors of today's attacks, but we are hearing reports by the minute of fatalities. At least 2 fatalities at Aldgate from police sources, but as I said, we heard reports from people on board one of the trains that they'd walked through a carriage that was littered with bodies. Let's go back live to Russell Square, speak to our correspondent Lisa Holland. Lisa, you're just describing what was going on there at the moment, and obviously this is something that they've trained for and hope they'd never have to do.
It certainly is, and from a very early stage here, I was at Liverpool Street initially and talking to one of the officers there. What do you think it is? And he just said, we simply don't know. It could be nuclear, biological, chemical. And that doesn't mean to say that he thinks it was specifically any of those things, but it means that his mind is in the mindset of police officers on the streets of London who have been trained for this very eventuality. Clearly, trying to get through the capital now is virtually impossible unless you opt for a very long journey on foot. It's very, very quiet here. There is a surreal sense of calmness, save for that being punctuated pretty frequently by the sound of the sirens of the emergency services as they travel from one destination to the next, given that there are so many incidents here today. Also here on the ground at Russell Square, the big concern is that there could be secondary devices, there could be multiple devices. We know that it's a classic tactic of somebody who wants to cause harm and mayhem, to draw people into an area and then release subsequent devices if this were to have been some kind of planned terrorist attack. We're of course hearing there a moment ago that we have no firm evidence as to what went on here this morning, but clearly everybody here on the highest possible state of alert, vehicles being checked, drains being checked, people being kept very well back behind police cordons. They're extending those cordons all the time as this operation continues. I just saw a gentleman a moment ago with very blackened face who clearly had been involved in the incident himself. It is ongoing. People are being treated, people coming from the local hospitals doing what they can to help those who need some kind of assistance.
Lisa Holland, we will speak to you again. Thank you very much indeed for that. If you're just tuning our way, it is coming up to midday. On the day it appears that the capital has come under attack. At least 2 people are known to have died and scores injured in a series of coordinated terrorist attacks in central London this morning. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, says there have been at least 6 explosions, but that the picture is still very confused. He said there were indications that explosives were used at one of the blast sites. All of the capital's hospitals are on major alert following the blasts. Scotland Yard says it has had reports of incidents at Edgware Road, King's Cross, Liverpool Street, Russell Square, Aldgate East and Moorgate. Police sources at the scene of the Aldgate explosion say they have unconfirmed reports of 2 fatalities and 9 serious casualties, while a doctor at the scene says there have been at least 90 people injured. And there are reports of 3 explosions on buses in the centre of the capital. One ripped apart a double-decker in Tavistock Place. The entire London Underground network has been shut down and all bus services have been suspended. Government ministers are meeting now to try to clarify the situation, and the Prime Minister will make a statement at midday. Mainline train operators are stopping services short of the capital and are urging people not to try to travel into London today. You are watching live images from Russell Square, the scene of one of the explosions this morning, an explosion on a double-decker bus in which the roof of the bus was ripped off. We know also that the emergency services on that site are dealing with casualties from the Russell Square tube station. There was an incident on the tube. We don't have many further details from the underground services on that so far, but basically people had to be brought out of the tube. Walking Wounded came out and spoke to us a little earlier on, speaking of a dreadful scene inside that tube station. So therefore, that area of London under significant pressure, having been the attack on a bus and a tube train, it seems. The emergency services have put their major incident operation into place, and we know that the government has already assembled its board called COBRA, which is an emergency committee set up to deal with this sort of incident. Stay with us here on Sky News. If you are trying to find out whether a relative is safe or whether you'd like to get a message to relatives who may be tuning our way this morning, you can do so on our Sky News ticker service. We are going to switch that service at the bottom of the screen onto an information service for relatives. news@sky.com is our email address. You can text us to on 84501.
Such a day of joy for London yesterday with the Olympic success, turning to such terrible tragedy today, and one of the leaders of the Olympic bid is now telling us that all celebrations connected to that have been put on hold following these attacks. With me in the studio, terrorism expert Chris Bellamy. Chris, I appreciate that it's difficult for you to judge exactly what happened here sitting in a studio, but we do know there were indications of explosives at least one of the blast sites. We heard Ian Blair, the Met Police Commissioner, tell us that a few minutes ago. Does it look like a conventional attack given the reaction of the emergency services?
The reports we're getting suggest conventional explosives, and I wouldn't be surprised if in fact there weren't explosives involved in all of the explosions, but we'll have to wait for confirmation of that. We have explosions in a ring around the centre of London. It all looks very well planned, and we had the bus blown up in Russell Square, and we also had an explosion on a train going from King's Cross to Russell Square station, as we heard. This looks to me like it's very well planned and very well coordinated. So far, we have had no indications that there were any chemicals or any other types of unconventional agents involved, but again, it is too early to be sure. I'm sure that all the casualties who are being treated for injuries in hospitals, that a wary eye is being kept open for evidence of other things, because it's something that we can't rule out. But at this very early stage, all the reports we're getting are of a purely conventional attack.
Terrorism expert Chris Bellamy, thanks for your thoughts at the moment.
Let's speak now to Julian Nettle. He's the Chief Executive of St Mary's Hospital in central London. Thanks indeed for joining us on this terrible morning, Mr Nettle. Tell us what's happening at the hospital.
So far this morning, we've treated the following patients. 4 people have come to us with very serious injuries and are in a critical condition, including loss of limb, serious blast injuries causing their difficulties. A further 8 people are in a serious condition, including head injuries, lacerations and smoke inhalation. And so far we've treated 14 people with more minor injuries, consistent with blast exposure, including things like temporary hearing loss. So far, I can report we've not had any fatalities, and we have not treated any children.
You're the hospital closest, I believe, to Russell Square, Julian Nettle. That's correct, isn't it?
No. We're the hospital that's virtually next door to Edgware Road Tube Station.
Right. Okay.
And that's the location that appears to be the sole source at the moment of people coming to us for treatment.
Right. So you're saying that they have been involved in a blast on the underground, effectively?
All I can tell you at the moment is that the injuries that we have seen have been entirely consistent with blast injuries, yes.
At what point did you get the first call, and how are you coordinating your operations at the moment?
About 9:20 in the morning. We have a specific and pretty well-rehearsed procedure here at St Mary's for dealing with incidents such as this. We also dealt with the Paddington rail crash a couple of years ago. What happens is, in these circumstances, we have a protocol where senior people from all the disciplines and other staff are called into the hospital through a particular communications route, which involves very rapid communication with hundreds of people. They report with specific duties to various places in the hospital. Many of them obviously come to A&E. We then clear various parts of the hospital for immediate use for larger than normal numbers of casualties coming to us. This includes the operating theatres, It includes, obviously, our wards where we have to admit patients, and our outpatients department, which we clear by cancelling routine clinics, asking people to go home in the circumstances who were due here for their outpatient appointments, and creating space for the more minor injuries to be cared for.
Sorry, do go on.
No, I was just going to say that it's a well-rehearsed procedure, which you'll find is more or less standard across most major acute admitting hospitals, certainly in London.
Presumably, though, the paralysis, which is now affecting the whole of the transport network in the capital, would affect your staff trying to get in on an incident like this?
Well, fortunately, if you're going to pick an optimal time where you want a major hospital to swing into action and provide care of this type, around 9 o'clock in the morning, when most people have got in to do their routine work, their routine operating, their routine outpatients, clinics and so on, it's a good time. So in fact, we have a very well-staffed hospital with plenty of senior clinical opinion and support to treat the people that come to us. So we, in fact, are doing very well in that respect.
And do you have any news from your colleagues at other London hospitals, or is that too soon?
It's far too soon, I'm afraid. We're simply dealing with the cases that are coming to us and dealing with the emergency services that are coordinating things at the site, which is literally only a couple of 100 yards down the road from where we are.
You sound extremely calm yourself, Mr. Nettle. What is the atmosphere in the hospital?
It's calm. We have people who are extremely professional, and they are getting on with their jobs. And it's a very impressive thing to see. But yes, there's a sense of calm urgency that I think infuses St Mary's, and I'm sure it's the same in all the other hospitals that are involved in this business.
And apart from the physical injuries, those who are being brought to your hospital for treatment must be in terrible shock.
Yes, we will obviously make sure that there is counselling support and all the other things that are required for people that may be suffering from more of the mental rather than physical traumas of an incident such as this. We'll be making sure that those arrangements are in place as well.
Julian Nettle, Chief Executive from St Mary's Hospital. We wish you well in the hours to come. Thank you very much indeed.
Let's talk to two of our guests in the studio at the moment. John O'Connor, he used to be the head of the flying squad in London, and Chris Bellamy, who's a terrorism expert. John, try to describe to us what would be going on at police headquarters at the moment.
Well, they'd have opened up the operations room at New Scotland Yard, and there'll be a gold controller who I would imagine would be the Assistant Commissioner in charge of territorial operations, and he will be coordinating with all the other emergency services and the other police services involved, such as British Transport Police and the City of London Police. So, you know, it's a well-rehearsed operation, opening up operations room, getting the staff in, getting the liaison officers appointed, getting the thing underway. So that's what will be going on. And I've been involved in those operations, and the one thing that does come out of it is the professionalism of the people that are running it, and the fact that you don't get any panic and you don't get anybody that's running around and bumping into each other. It is a matter of absolute calm, and their priorities at the moment are going to be, first of all, to ensure the public are as safe as possible, and also the next priority is clearly to attend to the injured.
I'm just thinking back to sort of the dark days of the IRA, or more recent Irish Republican terrorist-related attacks like Canary Wharf. We've never seen anything on this apparent scale.
No, that's right, and of course there's going to be speculation that it is a terrorist attack and who are the people responsible. If you recall the Madrid bombings, at the very start of that they blamed ETA, which was clearly wrong. And I think with the pattern of these type of explosives or explosions, and maybe when they know what type of explosive will use that's been used, it will become quite clear as to who's responsible for it. And I think, without putting names to it, it seems to me to be quite clear where the responsibility for this probably lies.
Chris Bellamy, hearing at the moment from the French Prime Minister that France is on a higher level of security alert, Germany as well, apparently. Is it a sad reality in today's world that after the United States, Britain is probably number one, or number two, I suppose I should say, on the world terrorist hit list?
I think that's right, and without wishing to speculate, and I fully endorse what Sir Ian Blair said about the dangers of speculating, I think that the scale of this attack indicates that it probably wasn't put together yesterday in response to London getting the Olympics, I think it was pretty obviously designed to coincide with G8. But also, as you say, because of the British involvement in Iraq in particular, after the Americans, we probably are the #1 target. One of the reasons why London has escaped being hit so far is, first of all, that our security is so good. And secondly, of course, there are a number of terrorist groups who operate out of here and therefore don't wish to set off bombs on their own doorstep. But I think, and I agree absolutely, that it's looking very much as if it's a particular organisation, and it's not the pattern of activity we get from the Continuity IRA or the Real IRA. It's very big, it's on a huge scale. You may remember that we rehearsed response to terrorist incidents in the City of London, the business district, I think it was months ago. But this appears to be a wider attack across, straddling the whole of the centre of the capital. Those IRA or bombs that were mentioned, of course, were attacks on economic targets designed to bring the British government to negotiations. This is not that kind of thing. This is an utterly indiscriminate, it appears to have been almost without warning, indiscriminate terror, and I'd agree with my colleague that we have a good idea of who it might be.
Chris Bellamy and John O'Connor stay with us in the studio, but thanks for the moment.
Indeed, you're watching Sky News. It's coming up to midday, the point at which we are due to hear from the Prime Minister making a statement from Gleneagles. He has been kept in close touch with the events of this morning. Let's speak now to Mark White, our correspondent, who is on a building overlooking Russell Square, I believe. Mark, good morning to you. What can you see?
Good morning to you. Yes, I'm high up on this building, which affords me a good view down onto Russell Square tube station itself. Now, I know we have been reporting the apparent bomb blast re the bus in Russell Square, but what I can tell you is there is an incident at Russell Square tube station as well. There are around about 20 ambulances, which I've counted, all stacked up outside the tube station. And just in the last few minutes, a convoy of about 7 more ambulances have arrived. And just in the 10 or so minutes that I've been here, I've observed about half a dozen stretcher cases being taken out from the tunnel, and also what are obviously doctors in the orange-clad boiler suits going down into Russell Square tube station itself. This, as many people will probably be aware, is a main tube line in London on the Piccadilly line, and it's one of the busiest tube stations in the capital. Very busy and very popular with tourists, as indeed is Russell Square. There are many large hotels around here. Many American tourists, many Japanese tourists all stay in this area.
So this is very much an ongoing situation then, clearly, Mark, with people still being brought out of the tube station.
Very much so indeed. Now, of course, we're hearing about this incident up in King's Cross. Now, that is linked to Russell Square, as it's on the Piccadilly line as well. It is possible that if the explosion on the tube train in King's Cross happened on that Piccadilly line, say halfway between Russell Square and King's Cross, they might be approaching it from both ends, or it could be a separate incident. But what I do know for sure is that there certainly is an incident that involves Russell Square tube station. There are a lot of ambulance personnel here and a lot of doctors as well going down into Russell Square tube station. It's an area I know very well. I used to live here until just a few weeks ago. In fact, I'm standing on the roof of my old building. It's an eerie sight, seeing the tube station that I often used to go down to head to work, now completely surrounded by emergency services, just fighting to save those who were stuck down in that tube line.
OK, Mark, for the moment, thank you for that.
Our correspondent Greg Milam is outside the Royal London Hospital. Greg, are you managing to see any of those scores of people who've clearly been injured in these attacks?
Well, we're seeing plenty of the walking wounded. When that van clears our picture, you'll see that, or maybe you won't, but on the right-hand side, just through the gate, there is a reception area where people wrapped in blankets or silver foil sheets are being taken, we assume, for comfort, those who maybe aren't more seriously injured. We've had a statement from this is the Royal London Hospital, saying that they've treated something like 100 patients already. 10 of those are seriously ill. condition here at the Royal London, and one fatality, certainly one fatality reported here as well, although no word from elsewhere. But there are a total of 95 casualties, they're saying, in addition to those more serious ones have been brought in, and their major incident plan is in place. They say this is the leading hospital for trauma cases. This is where the heliport is, of course, for the London Air Ambulance, and we've seen helicopters coming and going over the last half an hour or so as they head back into central London to deal there. But 100 patients, 10 patients seriously ill here, 7 in a critical condition, and certainly 1 fatality so far being confirmed here by the Royal London.
And Greg, as you were saying, given the fact that it is that main trauma centre, there will be a detailed emergency plan that is now kicked in there.
It is. They say it swung into place very early, and what that's meant over the last couple of hours or so is that doctors and paramedics and hospital staff who aren't on duty have been heading here in some hurry. And bear in mind, of course, all the members of the public who are nearby, and also all the patients in the hospital, because the hospital is closed to regular work that's going on. So there are other patients wandering around, unable to get into the hospital. We're expecting to see more arrivals. You can probably hear lots of sirens in the background here. That is the buses, the usual London buses that are being used to ferry patients here, because the ambulance service is coming and going with, I have to say, mainly people who have minor injuries or are suffering shock. They've been coming in regularly over the last hour or so. We've even seen taxis bringing people in.
Greg, there's a bit of an audio problem, I'm afraid, coming from you outside the Royal London Hospital. We'll just try and fix that microphone link and come back to you as soon as possible.
That is the scene there at Aldgate. You're watching Sky News. It's just gone midday. There has been a major incident, now presumed terrorist, in the capital this morning. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Ian Blair, has confirmed there have been 6 explosions and that explosives have been found at one of the scenes. This picture, though, is still very confused. He said, as I was indicating, that they have traces of explosives at one of the blast sites. No warning apparently was issued. All the capital's hospitals are on major alert following the explosions. Scotland Yard says it has reports of incidents at Edgware Road, King's Cross, Liverpool Street, Russell Square, Aldgate East and Moorgate. The 2 confirmed fatalities were at Aldgate, where doctors at the scene of the blast said that at least 90 people there have been injured. There are reports of 3 explosions on buses in the centre of the capital. Let's go to the Prime Minister at Gleneagles.
I'm just going to make a short statement to you on the terrible events that have happened in London earlier today. And I hope you understand that at the present time we're still trying to establish exactly what has happened. And there's a limit to what information I can give you. And I'll simply try and tell you the information as best I can at the moment. It's reasonably clear that there have been a series of terrorist attacks in London. There are obviously casualties, both people that have died and people seriously injured. And our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the victims and their families. It's my intention to leave the G8 within the next couple of hours and go down to London and get a report face-to-face with the police and the emergency services and the ministers that have been dealing with this, and then to return later this evening. It is the will of all the leaders at the G8, however, that the meeting should continue in my absence, that we should continue to discuss the issues that we were going to discuss and reach the conclusions which we were going to reach. Each of the countries around that table has some experience of the effects of terrorism, and all the leaders, as they will indicate a little bit later, share our complete resolution to defeat this terrorism. It's particularly barbaric that this has happened on a day when people are meeting to try to help the problems of poverty in Africa and the long-term problems of climate change and the environment. Just as it is reasonably clear that this is a terrorist attack or a series of terrorist attacks, it's also reasonably clear that it is designed and aimed to coincide with the opening of the G8. There will be time to talk later about this. It's important, however, that those engaged in terrorism realize that our determination to defend our values and our way of life is greater than their determination to cause death and destruction to innocent people in a desire to impose extremism on the world. Whatever they do, it is our determination that they will never succeed in destroying what we hold dear in this country and in other civilized nations throughout the world. Thank you.
The words of Tony Blair, his first reaction to the series of terrorist attacks. He has confirmed it in his words in the last few moments. A series of terrorist attacks in the capital this morning. He has offered, of course, his extended sympathy for those who have been dead and injured. We'll have more on that in a few moments' time, but it is important to underline that the Prime Minister in the next couple of hours is planning to leave the G8 summit to come to London, but will return to the summit later on. Let's listen to an eyewitness.
I got on the tube at King's Cross and literally just after we left the station, I was in the second carriage and there was just a massive bang and the whole train just then suddenly was dark, it was full of smoke and glass and everything just kind of went flying through the train. We couldn't see, we couldn't breathe, and it was, you know, honestly, for the first 2 seconds we didn't know we were going to get out. And then we just had to sit on the train and we sat there listening to people screaming who were obviously injured and we just waited and waited, and it felt like an hour, but it probably wasn't. It was probably about half an hour maybe, and they loaded us off from the back and we all had to kind of clamber through, walk along the lines, and then we got out of King's Cross, and then ever since then we've been sitting on buses at King's Cross station waiting to come to the hospital, and that's kind of it. So it was all a bit scary, really.
And what happened in hospital? What have you heard about what else has happened?
Not much. Obviously there are some people that are really badly bleeding. There's lots of staff in there, you know, there's huge amounts of doctors and everyone's really organised and good. But obviously the problem is now when people are being at home, you know, I live in
Let's take you live now to Russell Square. Our line breaking up a little from Aldgate there, but some dreadful insights there from one of the eyewitnesses at Aldgate. So we can speak now to Lisa Holland on the scene for us at Russell Square. An extraordinary coordination of the emergency services there underway, Lisa.
Yes, and every minute, Julie, more stories emerging of people who saw these events unfold this morning. I have with me a student called Yasus, who's from Japan. Yasus, if you can, just take us back and tell us the first thing that you heard and saw.
Well, I was on the corner of Tavis Square. I was about to cross the road, and then just an explosion. I had the explosion, and I looked back and just...
Any members of the press?
Sorry. And then just after the explosion, just some people are running down, and then I went into the Tavistock Square to figure out what happened there, and then I've seen several people injured, and.
So you heard the explosion, you went and you saw the bus. Can you describe what the bus looked like?
Well, bus is totally broken. The roof was exploded, and I think the back of the bus was off too. And I think I saw a piece of a bus in the Tavis Square.
Just to explain to our viewers, what you're probably seeing at the moment is the picture of a police officer who's putting the media down here on standby. We're going to be hearing from a senior officer who's going to be giving us some detail in a little while. just to continue with our eyewitness here, how many people did you see who were injured?
Well, at least three.
OK, we're now going to go over to one of the senior officers. I'm going to try and get a little bit closer and try and hear what's been going on this morning, what the officers have to say.
It's going to come through.
We're obviously, if you're bearing with us, just moving back a little bit here so we can clear the way for this continuous path of the emergency service.
Statement is because we've not been able to get a press statement out corporately from the ambulance services yet. So that's why we're going to do this press statement. But as I said, there's going to be no questions at this stage because we're still in the middle of operations. Paul Woodrow is the ambulance incident officer for this incident, and he's going to give a press statement on behalf of the LAS. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Paul Woodrow. I'm the ambulance incident officer here at Russell Square. I'm going to make a statement on behalf of the London Ambulance Service NHS Trust. Emergency services are currently responding to a number of explosions across London. Our priority for all the emergency services at the moment is the rescue operation, which is at present still continuing, obviously ensuring people are safe and ensuring that they get the medical treatment they need. I can confirm that emergency services have been called to King's Cross, Russell Square, Aldgate, Moorgate, Edgware Road, Liverpool Street and Leicester Square underground stations. I can also confirm that there's been an explosion on a bus in Tavistock Square. However, it's too early to confirm the cause of this explosion. At King's Cross Station, there is currently a rescue operation in the tunnel down in the line. Although we cannot confirm casualty figures, as it is too early, but we are dealing with large numbers of casualties, and we believe there are a number of fatalities. All underground lines are currently closed, and all national railway lines into London are also closed. Our advice to commuters is to take advice of emergency services and currently avoid travelling in London at present. And we ask all of you, if you need to use the LAS, by all means, but try not to unnecessarily at this time. As you can imagine, our services are quite stretched dealing with these incidents. That ends the statement. Thank you.
Can you just tell us how your members are coping with this at the moment?
Lisa, stay with us. We can just see you in front of the camera there. We were just hearing there from Paul Woodrow of the ambulance services. Indeed, apart from the commentary that we had from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, that is effectively the first word that we've heard from them on camera.
Yes, it is. I mean, it just gives you an idea of how fluid this situation is right here at the moment. As you heard, there's still an ongoing situation at King's Cross. It's also unclear exactly what's going on at Russell Square at the moment. I personally have seen members of local hospitals who've come here with blankets, with wheelchairs, with anything they can to help those people. We're unsure if there are still people trapped on the bus here in Russell Square. There was, of course, an explosion on a bus here. We believe a number of explosions on buses, of course, now it would appear coordinated with those explosions at rail and tube lines this morning.
OK, Lisa, thank you very much indeed for that. We've, of course, been hearing in the last few moments from the Prime Minister himself. He spoke on camera at Gleneagles a few moments ago. He'd called this series of terrorist attacks on the capital barbaric. He is returning to the capital in the next couple of hours to meet with the emergency coordination services known as COBRA. That project has swung into action, as we were hearing from the Home Secretary a little earlier on. He said very clearly those engaged in terrorism should realise that our determination to defend our values and way of life is greater than their determination to cause death and destruction. He will spend a couple of hours in London and then head back to the G8 to continue discussions there, and he has clearly the full support of the other heads at the G8.
We're going to go straight to the House of Commons to continue our coverage now. We're going to hear from them a little bit later. We've got a statement coming in from various clergy who are trying to be supportive at this time. One from the Archbishop Vincent Nichols referenced these blasts in London. Geoff Hoon now, Leader of the House, in the Commons.
That he agrees with in terms of its conclusions and having a discussion. And I'm confident that he will have had a discussion with ministers. He may not have liked what they have said.
That issue the Leader of the House, not discussing that issue. He'll be speaking on this issue and making a statement any time now. We're keeping an eye on that as we speak. We're just looking at the word on the wires.
Just
the
to
G8,
say,
indeed.
Some more words from the G8, Julie, coming through to us from the Canadian officials, saying that the G8 leaders will issue a statement on the attacks in London to back up, no doubt, Mr Blair's own words. 7 incidents in London cause a large number of casualties, as we heard from that ambulance spokesman. Fatalities have been feared. We have one source confirming at least 2 dead, and certainly from the eyewitness accounts we've had of those people, particularly perhaps leaving the tube tunnels, it does seem reasonable to fear that there may well have been fatalities. And there's certainly hearing that extra medics are now having to perform operations on the platform down at King's Cross. Just wondering whether Jeff Hoon is now addressing this particular issue.
This is the time of the year at which parents will approach their members of parliament if they are dissatisfied.
It seems not, I think, at the moment. We're keeping an eye on that. I suppose those who would like to attack democracy should note that business continuing in the House of Commons as we speak, and as we look at the images on the left-hand side of your screen of the now, we believe it's reported, some 30 ambulances on the scene at Russell Square. Our correspondent at the scene, who is overlooking the square from a building, said that people are still bringing people out of the station itself. You'll forgive me, I'm just hearing some more information coming through. We'll take you back to the House of Commons when we know that Jeff Hoon is going to address this issue this morning. But as I was just mentioning, some 30 ambulances on the scene at Russell Square. What has emerged there is a dreadful incident which the emergency services are facing. I think we have a new image now from Russell Square of the explosion on board the bus. It doesn't really need much description, that image. We heard news at about 10 to 10 this morning from one of our colleagues who was on the square at the time that there had been an explosion on the bus. He saw the roof being ripped off. This is on Russell Square, just not far at all from the tube station in which there had also been an explosion.
Julie, the bus itself to the right of our picture here, another London bus, actually, we would assume and hope the number 68 bus in the left of your picture, unhurt by this. But what we can certainly see is that this item of debris would, in my estimation, be the roof of the bus, and that gives you an extent of the force of the blast used here. This section would appear to be part of the superstructure. That would appear to be the side panel that used to belong to the upper deck. That has been bent towards our camera here and adjacent to the pillar box. We can see the various other bits of debris that have been strewn around the road here, and it's obviously post-emergency services arrival, and you can actually see people being held back in the top of this particular still frame. But the damage that's done to that bus, and we heard, Julie, if I'm not mistaken, from witnesses earlier suggesting this was what pretty much still rush hour time between
Indeed.
9 a.m, 11 a.m. I mean, these buses are always going to be full of people. And one fears for the passengers on that bus.
Indeed. We're just hearing from our correspondent Mark White, who is actually at Russell Square. He's just phoned in with the detail that he has seen body after body being pulled from Russell Square tube station. He's joining us on the line. Mark, just take us through it.
Yeah, this is an ongoing incident, Julie, down here at Russell Square. In addition to the number of casualties I've seen being taken out, there is just row after row of ambulances turning up all the time. Obviously, not just the London Ambulance Service, but they're being brought in from throughout the home counties to help out. This is a series of major incidents, obviously. Now, looking down onto Russell Square, high up on a rooftop here, looking down onto Russell Square tube station at the moment, there's a row of about 20 ambulances immediately outside the tube station. Also, fire rescue vehicles, firefighters are down in Russell Square tube station itself. There are numerous, what are obviously doctors in these familiar orange boiler suits as well, either going down into the tunnel or emerging with casualties. There have been walking wounded coming out, covered in the sort of silver blankets that we often see some of the walking wounded, less seriously injured, covered in, but many stretcher cases being brought out and into the back of ambulances. Once one ambulance is full, the next one is there lining up to take on board other casualties. Now, what we don't know at this stage is whether the explosion actually happened in the tube train at Russell Square, or whether it may be linked to the King's Cross tube explosion. The two stations are linked. Anybody that knows central London and knows the tube network will know that they're both on the Piccadilly line. So it may be that this tube train was on the Piccadilly line heading to Russell Square and may have exploded in the tunnel at some point, maybe halfway between the two stations. Now, if that has happened, it is obviously a terribly difficult scenario for the emergency services to try and cope with an explosion in a tunnel that may be several hundred metres away for a start, without obviously the effects of the explosion itself on the tunnel and the carriageway the carriage they may have been in.
We're just spotting above the Royal London Hospital, actually, as we're speaking to you, Mark, at Russell Square. We can see the air ambulance having been brought into force as well, ferrying people perhaps to other London hospitals who are all linked together in this emergency operation itself. Mark, just what do you know, if anything, of how the local hospitals to Russell Square are dealing with this?
Actually, I was at Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is the nearest hospital to Russell Square. For anyone that knows, I mean, it is a world-famous hospital. It's a children's hospital, and it doesn't have an accident and emergency unit there. But because, obviously, of the severity of this incident, they turned that into a makeshift triage centre. There were dozens of doctors and medical staff at the door to receive casualties. Now, I don't know at this stage how many casualties were taken to Great Ormond Street or are being treated there, but that literally is just at one street away from Russell Square. So obviously, because of the expertise just on the doorstep, it was quite advantageous for the emergency services, perhaps in the first instance, to get some people there. But of course, the Royal London, I mean, there's so many hospitals in this central London area that people are being taken to, and I'm seeing helicopters sporadically coming in and out of this area as well to pick up the most seriously injured casualties. But this area itself around Russell Square, of course, is very busy with tourists. There are many large hotels around here, very popular, especially with American tourists and Japanese tourists. I used to live here until just a few weeks ago. One of my bugbears, in fact, was the fact you could never walk on the pavements with the number of tourists. But looking down on the square at the moment, there are no tourists, just emergency services, line after line of ambulances, fire engines, and police just doing what they can to help the many casualties. As I speak, in fact, there is a large, it looks to be like a police control unit or perhaps an ambulance control unit arriving just at the square. It's on the back of an articulated lorry. Obviously, they're here for the long haul.
As you were mentioning, those people that were in that area and were thankfully unwounded, now pretty much away from that area. No evidence of people still about the square that don't need to be there now, Mark?
No, there are one or two people like me that are atop a building or looking out of their window if they live in this area, but the vast majority of people have been shifted back. I mean, just as I arrived here, they were actually moving the cordons further back, so it is very difficult to get any kind of a look down on the main incident areas themselves. Around the other side of this roof is the devastating scene involving the bus. I can't quite get to that at the moment, but what I'm overlooking is Russell Square Tube Station, and what, of course, we're looking for clarification of is whether this was another bomb attack on a tube train down at Russell Square Tube Station, or whether perhaps it is connected in some way to the King's Cross station explosion. As I say, the two are very close together, but a terrible scene here at Russell Square at the moment, just to see so many stretchers being taken out and put into the back of the ambulances, which are just waiting their turn to take the casualties.
Mark, thank you very much for that.
Most of Europe on alert now. France, Germany, certainly their governments have put their transport systems on high alert. We hear from the United States that New York, the city authority there, has sent extra police into their transport system around that city just as a precaution today. Let's hear more now about the Prime Minister's movements. Let's take you to the G8 summit at Gleneagles. Adam Bolton is there. Adam, what's the latest word you're hearing?
Well, as the Prime Minister said a few minutes ago, he is going to return to London for briefings with the emergency services and with ministers. The G8 work will continue, and then he'll return this evening for the final conclusions. We've already been told by the Canadian delegation, and the Prime Minister hinted at it in his statement, that the G8 leaders wish to make some sort of joint statement of solidarity in response to this terrorist attack. We don't know when that's going to be or in what form that's going to come, but obviously I think one would probably expect that today, most likely before the Prime Minister leaves. Interesting in his remarks that when he talked to people who desire to impose extremism on the world, clearly appears that the Prime Minister sees this as international terrorism of some kind, and obviously the Islamic fundamentalists of Al-Qaeda would be the first who jumped to mind, although he again said that he was convinced that this was timed to coincide with the main day of business at G8, describing it as particularly barbaric that it has occurred on this day. Also confirmed that there will be casualties. Interesting, though, that we've been told by government sources all morning that they were hoping the Prime Minister would be able to collate all the available information to tell us precisely what is going on. Instead of which he talked in very general terms about casualties, people dying, people being seriously injured. And I think that underlines that there is still a level of confusion. For example, in that statement by the ambulance man, he referred to Leicester Square as being somewhere where ambulance men had been called. That was not something that previously had been a particular focus of the stations that we know have been attacked. But what we are seeing is Mr. Blair caught between two stools. Clearly important business is being transacted here. He's got not just the G8 leaders, but the leaders of countries like South Africa, Brazil, India, China, all here. More African nations coming tomorrow. But obviously what he wants is to be seen in London, to be dealing with the immediate human crisis that's now facing the people of London and the people using the transport system. So he is going back, but it is his intention to be back here later this evening as well, although I imagine he will probably make further public statements while he is in London.
And interesting, the sort of European approach to this, Adam. There is some concern, not just checking actually, Homeland Security in the States says no intelligence indicating attacks similar to London planned in the US. That's just a word of reassurance for the Americans, no doubt. I think there have been various cities, including New York, have had to put some extra precautions out today. And the word, of course, just going around the world. But I was just making the point, Adam, that it is at a time when he has got some European colleagues, some international colleagues from further afield with him. It's interesting how European governments have had to respond to this, fearing that this is at least perhaps a worldwide, if not a European problem.
Well, obviously, if Mr. Blair is saying that he believes this has been timed to coincide with the G8 meeting, that would mean, in as much as there is any rationale for these sort of cruel attacks, that the other member states present at this G8 meeting, which includes, of course, France, Germany, Italy, would also be seen as potential targets if this is intended as some kind of protest against the G8, along with, of course, President Bush in America and Canada and Japan. What I think is fairly clear at this stage is that although devastating and causing a great deal of suffering, this does appear to be technically a much less coordinated attack than either the one that was seen in Madrid or, of course, on September the 11th. In terms of what we know so far, it's relatively easy to see how relatively few people using the tube system could have achieved this.
Adam, thanks for the moment.
More lines coming in on the news wires. No immediate plans to raise US terror alert from its current level, according to Homeland Security official. And also word reaching us from Germany, and this comes, of course, with a strong health warning. A group calling itself the secret organisation Al-Qaeda in Europe has posted, apparently, a claim of responsibility for the blast in London. According to a German magazine this hour, reputable, it's Der Spiegel, has reported that the group posted its message on a website popular with Islamic militants, which it did not name. It said the group claimed the explosions were in retaliation for Britain's involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. Of course, we should stress on that basis, of course, that many people will come forward to claim responsibility in the wake of an attack like this. So that is not confirmed, but it is a report which is reaching us from the AP news agency. Let's speak to our crime correspondent, Martin Brunt. You've had time, presumably now, Martin, to speak to your contacts at Scotland Yard. What more do you have for us?
Well, there's no confirmation of the number of casualties, and I guess whatever figure we get at some stage will change as the day goes on. But I'm told that there have been deaths at 2 locations. 2 of the 6 or 7 blasts have resulted in deaths of people. 90 casualties at Aldgate, that first explosion that the authorities went to. But other than that, the view is that this appears to have been a well-coordinated series of terror attacks. I'd say 6 or 7 explosions, deaths, injuries, all of them soft targets, the sort of targets that we have been warned about ever since 9/11.
The Metropolitan Police Chief had said that explosives had been found at one of the sites. Any more detail on that at all?
No, but he may be referring to the blast on the bus at Tavistock Place. That, again, I'm told, there are indications that was a suicide bomber. It may also be the case in the other explosions. They may also have been the work of suicide bombers, but certainly the bomb that went off on the bus, indications at this stage are that was the work of a suicide bomber.
And what is their assessment as to how this emergency effort is now unfolding?
Well, as well as they hoped it would go. We know that they have practiced this very thing in the past. Bank Station in the city was used for a wide-scale exercise involving all the emergency services. I'm told that our underground system in London is well prepared for this kind of attack, and the evacuation procedures are as good, if not better, than any underground system around the world. Clearly, that it's an operation that's going to go on for a very long time, but at the moment they feel confident that the systems they had in place are working as well as they expected them to. That's not to say there hasn't been complete chaos for the last 3 or 4 hours.
Yes, so I know Sir Ian Blair keen to stress that they're now bringing that under control. Just give us a brief sketch, if you would, Martin, as to how the coordination of this now works. We know that the the Cobra Group, has already met in Downing Street.
Yes, I mean, as I say, it's basically putting into place what really they've been expecting to happen. We know we've had warnings in the past. The former commissioner talked about the inevitability of such an attack. The Home Secretary, previous Home Secretary, said the same thing. So everything that they expected to have to do is being done. The evacuation continues at all of those stations that have been targeted. They've closed off the main rail services into London. I was caught up in one of those. Announcements all over at most of the leading stations coming into London that services were stopping and not going on to the terminals in London. So that's the sort of thing that's going on. And of course there'll be checks going on at many other tube stations, because the great fear is, of course, that there will be other attacks given the coordination of the attacks that have gone off so far.
Just stay with us a little longer, Martin. We've just seen on the Reuters news agency that an Italian news agency is saying that a previously unknown group has claimed responsibility for the London attacks in the name of Al-Qaeda. We should always stress in these situations, Martin, that there are many affiliations that would be keen to link themselves with an attack on this scale.
Absolutely. There's always going to be groups that will jump on the bandwagon. That's not to say that report from Italy isn't accurate. And I think one of the major concerns will be that there appears to have been no firm warning or any warning at all, certainly in intelligence terms, that this was about to happen. The authorities have always told us since 9/11 that if they had intelligence that pointed to an imminent attack, then they would broadcast that, and clearly that didn't happen. So there will be questions asked, I'm sure, about what intelligence, recent intelligence, had been gathered, and whether there was any real fear that this was about to happen. Of course, in the past, there have been clear warnings that the G8 summit would be a target, and I'm sure that the concern there wasn't solely centred on an attack around Glen Eagles. It would appear that the G8 perhaps has been the catalyst for this attack. The world's attention is on the British at the moment because of what's going on in Scotland. And it looks as though the terrorists have taken that opportunity. And it may well be that this has come the day after Britain is celebrating, London at least is celebrating the arrival of the Olympics in 2012. And perhaps the terrorists will see that as a bonus, that they've really put the kibosh on celebrations that have been going on since that announcement yesterday.
OK, Martin, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. The AP news agency is quoting a police report describing a number of fatalities at one London subway station.
That would almost certainly, but this was taken, this picture. Let me show you this picture. This has come in, this was taken on the Northern Line, the sort of just going through King's Cross station. Keith Tagg, a viewer of ours, has just sent us this. This is the aftermath of that. Now, I imagine it's a phone picture, and you can see the sort of sense of the darkness there, the single light in the carriage, and perhaps from evidence from him holding the collar of his coat, or perhaps a scarf to his mouth, that there is much dust in the air. So that just gives you one sense of the level of emergency that was going on. Now, this is completely unrelated, perhaps, is that there's a Polish problem in one of the Polish government buildings. We would imagine that we'll keep an eye on that and see if that is related in any way. We know about 2 fatalities already. The fear has to be for many more. The discussion has to be whether or not the incident which we're focusing on in Russell Square concerning a double-decker bus, which has been all but destroyed, certainly the upper levels have been destroyed by the explosion. Although none have been confirmed at this time, one would imagine fatalities will have followed from that instant. As we watch these pictures from Russell Square and keep an idea on other developments, incidentally, the Commons, the sitting there has been suspended 10-1. They're going to come back in the Commons today in order that the Home Secretary will make a fresh statement to the House. At Sky Centre with us is Nick Cochin, who's written a book about the ability of terrorists to finance their activities. So, Nick, you would have a view as to whether this kind of operation, it would appear a number of explosions on the tube system and one, we would imagine, deadly explosion on a bus, the work of terrorists, in your estimation?
Oh, well, without question, the work of terrorists, and the question is, which terrorists are we looking at? And there seems to me, in terms of the degree of coordination between the outrages that we've seen today, one brings to mind Madrid, one brings to mind obviously 9/11, one brings to mind some of the activities in Baghdad. I mean, transportation is a classic target for terrorists. Economic assets such as the city and Aldgate and so forth, these are classic targets for terrorists. I mean, the IRA showed us the way. Al-Qaeda's followed. There can be no question this is a coordinated attack, and Islamic terrorism would seem to be the obvious people involved.
As we converse, Nick, let me just focus on the still we're showing to the right of our picture. I mean, the actual devastation to the bus is total, in the sense there is the top section. Here is that roof panel lying in the road, and one would imagine that would bear the hallmarks of, and the question mark still remaining about whether that might have been a suicide bomb attack.
Well, it would be logical, if one is talking about Islamic terrorism, that suicide bombers be involved. This is, after all, their classic modus operandi. Also, one looks at terrorists here targeting economic assets and transportation assets. I think one has to say, and the other point is lack of warning. Islamic terrorists, particularly recently, have not been using warning signals to give any form of notice. So that is further deadly evidence.
Indeed so. There was a report in the first confusion in the minutes following these incidents being reported that somehow the Israeli embassy had received a warning. That has been denied by the Israelis. And in any case, that probably would that necessarily have been the sort of place where a terrorist would form? Well, that's pure speculation, I suppose.
Sounds a bit like a hoax to me.
Yeah. The way, though, that authorities here, and it's interesting how we've had to report that the authorities around most of Europe, the Italians have mentioned it in name, the French, the Germans, and now there are Americans, particularly on the East Coast, as I suppose they're coming into their morning rush hour now, saying they've had to put extra forces on the public transport systems in their cities. But it is something that is vulnerable every day to an attack such as this.
Well, when you've got huge numbers of people being moved around, you've got particularly rush hour, which of course is when this was targeted and when 9/11 was targeted. You've got, control is at its weakest and flows are at their fastest. People are most vulnerable, particularly from suffocation and mass crowding.
And the point, if you like, of an attack such as this to maim, to terrorise, one appreciates that, but why do they do it, perhaps, and the juxtaposition with the G8 is maybe an obvious conclusion to draw, although that's supposition on my part, the effect they want to have? What? Because it's not going to change Tony Blair's discussions, or it's not going to change George Bush's discussions in Scotland, is it?
I just wanted to point about G8. I think grandstanding, this sort of capturing the high-profile media event, is a terribly important and significant terrorist goal and strategy.
Itself is the raison d'être.
I think it is. I mean, I think they're saying to the G8, we're still around. You may think we've gone quiet, but here we are, and we can hit you in the centre of London, which is where you are best protected or supposed or boast to be. And I think it's that shock to the establishment, the economic, the political establishment, that G8, the Al-Qaeda want to say. It's the most daring outrage that they've done for a couple of years, I would say. And it's that daringness, as much as the absolute threat and carnage, that is the Al-Qaeda message.
And that has to be a disappointment for the authorities, be it Scotland Yard or the other elements within the secret services and so on, who have said and claimed, certainly, that in recent years they have thwarted attacks of various sorts because of their ability to plug into the planning area. Now, this would seem to be a failure of that. This would have been, if it is the work of terrorists, it would seem that it's been planned effectively in secret.
Well, certainly planned in secret. All these things are done so because that's their modus operandi, and that's why they succeed. I think the point is that, Al-Qaeda is now, it's been some assumption that Al-Qaeda has gone quiet. I mean, I think there's been a bit of a feeling of let-off on the pressure on terrorism. Only recently, I think, the government actually ceased to subsidise insurance against terrorism for city firms. Now, that said to me, somebody is loosening the reins somewhere, and I wonder if Al-Qaeda said, now is our moment, the watch is being reduced, we can step in.
Well, in which case, isn't there an awful inevitability that that's a permanent state of affairs? The governments take measures. They are limited, perhaps, in their success at containing these things for a period of time, and then a terror attack comes in. How might one break that cycle of events taking place?
There was a major, let's face it, after September 11th, there was a huge, fantastic sort of global coming together against this thing. And we can't deny that, the pressure could not be maintained. But now I think we're seeing, there are cells sitting there, quietly hiding, and now they're coming out of their boxes, if you like. And this is something the West is, and I think America has said we have to live with.
Nick Koshan, thank you for the moment.
Martin, thanks. Just a couple more Newswire reports worth mentioning to you. From Rome, it is being reported, their assessment from news that they've received, they say that at least 50 people have been killed in a series of explosions. That is according to an Italian news agency, which is quoting Italy's Interior Minister Giuseppe Pisanu. As soon as we get any confirmation on figures, of course, we'll bring it to you. Also, word from Westminster Council chiefs, pupils should remain within school buildings. It's received advice from the capital's emergency planning team that schools have been advised to continue normal activities but to remain on site until there is further information. Regular updates are being made to head teachers. and advice will be issued later in the day. Some comments on our emails that they are very glad, of course, that the school holidays hadn't begun. At least most children in that area would have been safely, one would hope, in their schools. And we're just looking at some more detail for you on the comments that we're hearing from this. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, has said that it has full confidence in the London authorities to secure the Games. This is not at all related to the Olympics. That is word from the IOC this morning. A faint memory indeed of those celebrations yesterday when London secured the Olympic Games for 2012. Let's speak now to our correspondent Thomas Moore, who is at the Royal London Hospital. What's happening there, Thomas? Good morning.
Well, they've got a very well-organised major incident plan here, as you would expect. There's been a series of buses that have been arriving from elsewhere, from the major incidents, and they've been bringing in the walking wounded in a steady stream. They've had 95 casualties brought to the hospital so far. Obviously the walking wounded on the buses, but then there have been many others who have been brought by ambulance, and indeed the air ambulance, which is based here at the hospital, so they will be receiving many of the most serious injuries. And the latest figures we do have, 10 patients seriously ill, 7 patients are in a critical condition. Now, most of the patients would have had significant cuts from flying glass in an explosion like this. You could imagine that many of those cuts will be superficial, but obviously there would be an awful lot of blood that is going to be needed here to replace the blood lost from that kind of injury. They would also need operations to remove the glass, perhaps shards of metal and so on. But they're also saying that there have been some significant bone injuries, orthopedic injuries, which have required immediate surgery.
What is the atmosphere at the hospital? We were speaking to one of the chief executives from St Mary's earlier, and he seemed extraordinarily calm and on top of exactly what had to unfold in terms of the coordination of the staff there. Any commentary at all from the Royal London, just in terms of staff actually being able to get in there to help because of the closure of so many of the transport services?
Yes, indeed. Traffic is gridlocked around here, as you'd imagine, because Aldgate is only about 400, 500 metres from the hospital, and traffic around here really is at a standstill. All hospitals do have well-rehearsed major incident plans, and that's why everybody is extremely calm, because they know exactly what they're doing. You may be able to see in the pictures there are staff ready at the door of A&E. They're ready to receive the next seriously injured patient who comes in. And there is a very well-rehearsed system for triage that's assessing how serious the injuries are and how quickly they need to be dealt with. Every hospital has that plan, and with the major incidents that we have seen in the capital over the last few years, with the train crashes and so on, they just bring that into play. And every time you do see staff coming in on their days off to lend a hand, because of course the more hands the better.
And just describe for us, Thomas, the people who don't know that area of London, the Royal London Hospital itself on a main road into the heart of the city, the big financial district, often very, very busy itself.
Yes, indeed. It is a very busy road. It cuts through a very densely populated part of London. The main road has a market running down one side that won't have helped the traffic. Even on a normal day, the traffic is very heavy around here. When police start closing off roads and obviously with emergency vehicles racing up and down these streets, the problems become even worse.
OK, Thomas, thank you very much indeed for that. I'll speak to you again later.
Just the words of sympathy continue to come from national leaders and from the Church, from Vatican City. Pope Benedict XVI sending a message condemning as inhuman the series of attacks on London Transport Network, which left at least 2 people dead and scores injured. We're expecting more details from the Home Secretary, Charles Clarke. Within the next few minutes, we believe the Commons sitting, which has been suspended, will restart then. Let's just check on another hospital dealing with this. Let's head west to a hospital adjacent to Edgware Road. Another incident this morning, St Mary's Hospital. There for us is Nicola Hill. Nicholas, bring us up to date.
Yes, indeed. Well, here at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington, they've got 27 people who've been brought here so far. 4 people have been critically injured. That means they've either lost a limb or they have serious blast injuries. There are 9 people here who are seriously ill, suffering from severe smoke inhalation, and there's another 14 with minor injuries, which does include loss of hearing because of the extent of the blast. Now, staff at the hospital here are on standby. The roads around have been cleared, and actually standing outside the Accident and Emergency Department are staff with wheelchairs, with hospital trolleys, just in case they have any more injured people brought in. A very successful triage system has been set up at a local hotel, the Hilton Hotel, where people are going to. They're then being assessed by medical staff who are then deciding whether they need hospital treatment, and if so, which hospital the people ought to be sent to.
And the system that they've had to put in place working as well as could be expected under the circumstances, Nicola?
Well, as Thomas was saying from the Royal London Hospital, the whole of London, all the hospitals in London have a very well-rehearsed emergency plan. This means that certainly here at St Mary's, all outpatients have been cancelled. Any elective operations, ones that are planned in advance, have been cancelled today. And they have checked on the numbers of inpatients so that if they need their beds, they'll send them home. Now, this is the normal emergency plan, and the hospital here say it's going very, very smoothly. It's a plan they rehearse regularly, and it's as going as smoothly here as it is at the Royal London, and indeed any other hospital across the capital that is on standby.
OK, Nicola, thanks for that.
We're just hearing from one of our correspondents that there is now a meeting underway at Scotland Yard, the Gold meeting. That is one of the special groups which has been designed to deal with this sort of issue. Alongside me, John O'Connor, former head of the Flying Squad in London. Thanks for staying with us, John, throughout the morning. What can you tell us about this sort of meeting? Who's involved? What does it do?
Well, what you have is you have one person who's in charge of the whole operation, who will be the Gold Commander, which I would imagine would be an assistant commissioner, and around him he would have staff officers, other people advising him, and they'll be devising the strategy and getting updates on what's actually happened, devising a press statement to be made on behalf of the Commissioner. The Commissioner himself may indeed make the statement. And of course they'll be liaising with the Cabinet Office briefing room as well, COBRA. So that's what the whole point of that is. It's to set objectives. I mean, clearly the objectives still are preservation of life, but then the next stage is going to come in, which is going to be the conduct of the investigation.
Yes, it's perhaps worth dwelling on that for a moment. We know that the Met Commissioner has already said there were traces of explosives at one scene, and there has been raised the notion of the operation of a suicide bomber. These areas, as well as scenes of search and rescue, are now crime scenes too.
That's absolutely right. There's at least 7 crime scenes, and they've all got to be properly sifted through, and the debris from those crime scenes will be taken down to Woolwich, and they have to be kept separate. You don't want the cross-contamination of the various crime scenes, and then it's sifted through, and what they're going to need to find out is what type of explosive was used. I think the explosive that was used in the Madrid bombings was RXD, which seems to be a favourite of Al-Qaeda, and that'll be an indication of who the perpetrators may be. And of course we've also heard that there's at least one suicide bomber believed. Well, that's going to be very interesting once he's been identified, you know, what his background is, who his colleagues are, where he was educated, and all of that, and that might give leads into various other groups. So there are significant leads with every time there's a terrorist incident like this.
Well, it was noted also apparently at this meeting that there was no significant security chatter, as it's known, ahead of this series of explosions this morning. But I suppose at this point the security services have to move very, very fast.
Well, they do, but you know, I think one of the great failings has been with the security services that we haven't had the great strikes against these terrorist groups that one might have expected. We seem to have been playing catch-up since 9/11, and although they're making great strides, I don't think that they've got the right people in place to be able to penetrate these groups. And these groups, as we know, are extraordinarily difficult to break into because they seem to work interdependently, and they're very mercurial in the way that they operate. And what the security services need to do is to find out how the command and control structure works, how the finance works, and to try and get those kind of pictures. They need informants, they need undercover officers.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll speak to you a little later on. And I think, Martin, that we're expecting a reaction from Ken Livingstone.
Indeed so, yes. That's just coming to us in just a few moments' time. Let me just express some other, if we can sum up for people who may be just tuning our way, having heard about this or finally got to a television set. A series of explosions then, 7 incidents in all across London. On the tube map of London, they are restricted to those stations to the northeast and the north of the central area. So King's Cross Station, Russell Square just to the south of that, Aldgate Station to the east of King's Cross, Moorgate, Edgware Road, that's the furthest west these incidents have come. And we have heard one report from an ambulance spokesman that Leicester Square Station was being needed. To the Commons, here's the Home Secretary speaking live.
Statement, Secretary Charles Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, can I apologise to you and to the House for being slightly later than I'd hoped to be for making this statement. As the House will know, Mr. Speaker, there have this morning been a number of terrorist attacks in central London. The situation is developing, and I'm not yet in a position to give a conclusive account of all that has happened, but I wanted to keep the House as fully informed as possible. I want to begin by expressing on behalf of the whole country our sympathy for those injured and the friends and families of those who've died. I'm not in a position at this time to give precise details, but what I can say is that 4 explosions have been confirmed. First, on a tube train between Aldgate East and Liverpool Street. Second, on a bus in Woburn Place. Third, on a tube train between Russell Square and King's Cross. And fourth, on a tube train at Edgware Road Station. As yet, we do not know who or which organisations are responsible for these criminal and appalling acts. Of course, our first responsibility is to protect and support the public at this time. The Metropolitan Police are in operational command, using well-established and tested procedures. The health services are providing first-class care and support. On transport, the Underground is closed and will remain so for some time, but certainly closed today. There are no buses in central London. Transport for London will decide when to resume services later today. Overground services are subject to substantial delays. Most stations are open, but some are closed. Network Rail will try and reopen them as soon as they can. Airports are operating normally. People are strongly advised not to travel into central London, as the emergency services must be allowed to do their work in the most effective way that they can. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet was informed this morning, and since then I've chaired COBRA meetings to ensure that the whole government commitment is properly coordinated and any necessary support is provided. The Prime Minister is returning to London from Den Eagles to chair a COBRA meeting later today. I will continue to keep the House fully informed.
David Davis.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for coming to the House so promptly this afternoon. We understand only too well the matters that constrained his time. And let me say at once that I join him in saying that the thoughts and prayers of this side of the House are with all those who were killed or injured earlier today, and indeed their families and friends too. And let me also pay tribute to the men and women of our emergency services. Their response to events such as this is invariably heroic, and we thank them from the bottom of our hearts. This morning's explosions were acts of almost unspeakable depravity and wickedness, planned with a deliberate intention of taking innocent life, and the whole House condemns them utterly. Yeah. This is not just an attack on our capital city, but on our country and our way of life as a whole. And it goes without saying that the government will have our full and wholehearted support in dealing with this assault on our society. We stand ready with them to play our part. I welcome the Prime Minister's assurance earlier today that the important work of the G8 meeting in Scotland will go on and will not be disrupted by today's terrible events. Now is not the time to allow the terrorists to disrupt our lives in any way. Now is also not the time for many questions. I have just 3 very straightforward ones for the Home Secretary. Could the Home Secretary tell the House what plans are being put in place to protect other British cities that may be at risk at this point in time? There's also obviously confusion at this time, but the most important thing is for the people to remain as calm as possible. To help with this, what plans does the government have in place to keep the public informed about events as the day unfolds? And finally, Will the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary return to the House on Monday, when more information is known, to make a full statement on this terrible event? A prime aim of terrorists is to demoralise and divide our communities. It is right that we should be angry at today's atrocities, but it's no less essential that we should remain both clear-headed and united. We say to the terrorists, you will not succeed in setting us against one another. Britain has a long history of dealing with terrorism. We've joined together to fight it in the past. Today we do so again. For now, the terrorism that walks the streets of London has no face. But whatever its origin, whatever its motive, our response will be the same. The British people will not be cowed, and the terrorists will not win.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, I'm very, very grateful for the wholehearted and powerfully expressed support of the opposition. I appreciate the remarks made by the Right Honourable Gentleman. They're in the spirit that I would expect, and I appreciate them. Secondly, of course, he is right to pay tribute to the vast range of men and women who are working to keep the city working in the way that it should at this time, and to their personal heroism and courage in often difficult circumstances. Third, when I spoke to the Prime Minister this morning about this, he was keen to make clear that the colleagues of his in the G8 meeting in Gleneagles, A, were sympathetic and supportive to us in this situation, but B, exactly as the Right Honourable Gentleman said, feel that it's very, very important that the very important work of the G8 is continued.